Trump and his vice president have activated the most alarming and complex debate about the Ukraine peace process, these overtures, Zelensky's defiance, Sunak's backing of Starmer, the broader European concerns about the peacekeeping troops. Trump has certainly made a mark at the beginning of his presidency by throwing European diplomacy into disarray, and with his characteristic bravado, he's announced a productive call with Putin, declaring that both sides had agreed to seek an end to the war in Ukraine. He wants peace, he says. The problem, neither Ukraine nor its European allies were consulted, and Lavrov today says that Putin or that Russia will not concede any territory that they've taken. This episode encapsulates the current moment of transatlantic turmoil. Trump, eager to extricate the US from what he sees as a costly entanglement, has opened back-channel negotiations with the Kremlin. And meanwhile, Zelensky, who had to learn about these talks through the press, is left fuming, his country's fate apparently being discussed without him, behind his back, over his head. And in Europe, the sudden shift has sent leaders scrambling, with Starmer, Macron and Scholz convening an emergency summit in Paris today to salvage some semblance of control over the process. One of the thorniest issues emerging from the crisis is the prospect of peacekeeping troops in Ukraine. And Starmer has floated the idea that Britain could be ready and willing to contribute forces to enforce a post-war settlement. And Rishi Sunak, in a rare show of support for his successor, has backed this stance, reflecting an emerging consensus that Europe must take greater responsibility for its own security. However, the reaction from other European leaders has been less enthusiastic. Spain's foreign minister dismissed the idea as premature, Poland flatly ruled it out, and Germany signalled deep reservations. Even within the UK, defence analysts have pointed out that Britain's army is stretched thin, its numbers and resources a shadow of what would be required for a sustained deployment. And meanwhile, Trump's own team can't seem to settle on a position. He's quite happy to send soldiers and US personnel into Gaza, but not into Ukraine, it seems. His special envoy, General Keith Kellogg, insisted that no options are off the table, including US boots on the ground, I suppose. But that's not the impression they're giving. His Vice President, J.D. Vance, contradicted what was said almost immediately, declaring that European nations, not the US, would have to shoulder the burden of any security force. This diplomatic whiplash has only fueled European anxieties that Trump's grand strategy amounts to little more than an America First retreat, not unlike Afghanistan, leaving Britain and the Europeans to clean up the mess. Adding further intrigue is Trump's economic price tag for continued American support. What support? In a staggering move, his team reportedly presented Ukraine with a demand: control over 50% of its critical mineral wealth, its titanium, lithium and cerium reserves, in exchange for a continued US backing. This is not just a peace plan. It is, as some in Kyiv have called it, economic colonization. And Zelensky, unsurprisingly, has been cautious about the deal, which came with no firm security guarantees against future Russian aggression. Meanwhile, Trump's diplomatic chessboard is littered with inconsistencies. His Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth shocked NATO allies by declaring that Ukraine must give up its ambition to join the alliance and cede Crimea and Donbass to Russia. Yet a day later, Trump himself hedged, suggesting that everything is on the table. The net effect? European officials are left questioning whether Trump's negotiating team even has a unified position. And on the Russian side, Sergei Lavrov has been unusually blunt. He declared that Moscow would not return 1 inch of territory it has taken, but in a surreal twist, demanded the return of the Kursk region recently seized by Ukraine. This rhetorical posturing suggests that Russia is entering talks from a maximalist position, seeing Trump's eagerness for a deal as an opportunity to extract the most favourable terms possible. At the same time, there's a growing suspicion in European circles that Trump's strategy will ultimately amount to appeasement. Kaja Kallas, the EU's top diplomat, openly fumed, "Why are we giving them everything they want before the negotiations have even started?" She's not alone in her unease. It was in Munich, where European leaders gathered last week, that the ghosts of history loomed largest. Zelensky himself made reference to Neville Chamberlain's infamous Peace in Our Time agreement with Hitler in 1938. vowing that Ukraine would not accept a deal that simply sets the stage for future Russian aggression, yet European leaders seem divided over how to proceed. While Ursula von der Leyen has called for a surge in defence spending, Macron and Scholz have yet to outline a concrete plan for strengthening European security. The absence of clear leadership has only emboldened Putin, whose state media is gleefully spinning the moment as a sign of Western weakness. In the short term, Europe's leaders will continue scrambling to find a response to Trump's impromptu diplomacy. Starmer, for his part, will meet Trump next week, likely to press the UK's case for a more coordinated approach, and meanwhile Zelensky is pushing for European leaders to step up in America's absence, arguing that without firm guarantees, any deal will simply set the stage for the next war. But the fundamental problem remains unresolved. Can a stable peace be built when one of the negotiating parties, let's say Ukraine, is being treated as an afterthought? And if Trump succeeds in cutting a deal which satisfies his isolationist instinct but leaves Europe more vulnerable, will the continent be able to mount an effective response? For now, the crisis barrels forward at breakneck speed. The next chapter is likely to be written in Riyadh, where the US and Russian officials meet this week, and in Paris, where European leaders will attempt to salvage some control over the process starting this evening. One thing is certain. Whether through careful negotiation or chaotic blundering, history is being made. And as always, Ukraine is caught in the middle.